Hello, this is Gail Ferris, your narrator. In 2011, I arrived at Upernavik with 27 knots of wind. I head out of town, swinging out a little bit to the west so I can see what's on the outside, just for fond memories of old travels. Wow, what a scene! I waited for a couple of days for the weather to calm down, and then I took off from Gamahang, and this is what it looks like near the museum. Here I am paddling just past the museum. I remember those many times I traveled past the western outer flank of Sanderson's. Now I was going to swing around and paddle due east, down through Torsut Passage. I thought I'd let you see what it looks like from my cockpit without adjusting for the wave angles. My Mark I folding kayak is very seaworthy, and it is nicely ballasted with all of my camping gear. I am just passing down Long Island or Langa'u, viewing the protected anchorage that's along the side. And now at the end, I'm catching a view of Sanderson's Hope. Here I am catching a view of the opening of Torsut Passage. Just as I am inside the passage, some fish fry are jumping. The Granite Peninsula with glacial erratic, looking from Torsut Passage outward toward the ice gathered off the pass. The icebergs you have just seen are blowing across on the prevailing winds, and when they ground out here at this island, they release all of their nutrients, which is rock flour that contains fertilizing agents such as phosphate and iron. My Mark I kayak pulled up on a ramp. These natural ramps are all over Upernavik. The rudder in view is a sailing rudder. The bright blue bag in the foreground is one of my rollers that I devised for bringing the kayak up the rocks without scratching the skin. Inside the blue nylon cover are 3 Mylar gallon-sized wine bags, partially filled with air to make them 6 inches diameter. When I came in for a landing, this is what I saw: ice just laying around on the rocks. At 1:30 the next morning, very, very early of course, everything was bathed in a magical orange light. I set my tent up on the only level dry place on the whole island, right next to the water.
Ice is constantly on the move here. These icebergs have come in here to rest.
On the east side of this island, here is a pair of common guillemots swimming about. This is glaciated orange granite. Birds usually like to swim around in tight circles, guillemots. There's lots of them that live on and off of this island. Here they are. On the west side of this island, their preferred area where there's more food available. This is very typical behavior of guillemots. This high-pitched peeping you're hearing is very typical of these birds. I'm capturing this video from my kayak and getting some wind in my microphone. These birds live on this island and they eat lots of crustacea and tiny fish that are in the waters off of this island. It's a great place for them.
This iceberg is probably grounded out.
On these shallow rock ledges, it's a tabular iceberg, very typical of this Upernavik area. All these grounded out icebergs are the source of food and nutrients for the animals and plants in this area. I'm looking northeastward toward the Upernavik ice fjord, and now I am swinging around east and then south. This is a view of the ramp my kayak is rolled up on. These icebergs in view are grounded out at the end of Tarsut Passage. They can't make it in any farther. A view of guillemots in formation paddling. A comical view of who's leading and who's following, which always changes. How the icebergs are getting here on the edge of the island where I am camping. They're blowing across from Upernavik Ice Fjord. Here is a view of my tent, and you can see it is really on the edge of the water. In the last evening I was on this island, a large iceberg was right off of where I was camping. It started to break up. That was frightening. These bergy bits are really pieces of compressed snow, just full of air. The odd clunking you're hearing actually is pieces of ice washing up on the rocks. The black color in the iceberg right off this peninsula is an example of suspended rock solids which eventually melt out as the iceberg stays in the area. Look at this rounded surface of this granite batholith that is here. It's metamorphosed marine sediments, and it has been glaciated smooth. Just down behind my tent that you see, in this indentation, is a great profusion of sea urchins and barnacles, all busy feeding on the available food supply in the water. In this little shallow indentation, there's vast amounts of organic particulates that just go back and forth with the currents, and they're available for all of these barnacles to feed upon. Here we have this huge population of not only acorn barnacles, but also goose barnacles, and around the corner in various places, very large population of blue mussels, which I and a friend love to come and gather. This is a bright sunny day, and I am just standing ankle deep in the water, pointing my video camera straight down to gather this information. On the bottoms of all of the icebergs, all sorts of copepods and other macrofauna cling to the bottom of the icebergs, feeding on what exudes from them. And then they become food for the birds, which create all of this suspended particulate matter. I have slowed this section down greatly just so we could watch in great detail the barnacles as they are feeding. It's wonderful what we can see with a simple video camera just pointed straight into the water. It's exciting to think that here we are looking at these barnacles actively feeding, and here are the guillemots feeding on the animals that feed on this particulate matter all around this island. The first time I passed by these islands was in 1992, and it was just exactly the same situation. All of these little guillemots having a great time feasting. Now I will show you the east side of the island. Right here is a group of pieces of sod which may have at one time been a sod house. What's mixed in with the sedimentary metamorphosed layers of granite is iron deposits that are so dense they can affect the readings on a compass. The iron that leaches out from these deposits enriches the soil greatly and the seawater around. This is an open face of granite, complete with pink feldspar and lots of hornblende. It's rich in phosphate, which supports lots of growth. Blue-greens and lichens are heavily colonizing this newly exposed rock flower soil. This is mountain aubens or Dryas integrifolia growing out of crevices in this bedrock. This lichen Cladinia, along with Arctic willow, Salix herbacea, is happy to grow out of this soil. Cladinia is a lichen which caribou can eat. This moss is common everywhere. It's Polytrichum communis, and it is perfectly able to grow in recently disturbed frost-heaved soil. This willow, Salix glauca, can grow on the tiniest bit of soil deposited among the fissures in this rock. And Salix arctophylla can also do the same. They are both highly wind resistant, as you can see, with a thick bark, thick leaves, and hairy stems. This is a wintergreen, believe it or not, and it has very thick, glossy leaves. It's also growing for some protection among Salix glauca, Ambitra nigrum, and even Cassiope tetragona, as well as being protected by the rock. Cassiope tetragona grows on wet hillsides near boggy areas in brilliant sunlight. It makes a wonderful cooking fire because it's very, very rich in resins. This stellaria and next this antonaria are both distorted in shape because they are growing in the protection right up against the rocks. Normally they would be very low mounds or dense cushion. This anemone is growing in such a well-protected area it has large, hairy leaves. This whelk shell just simply blew up the bank out of the water. This is a saxifragia oppositifolia, and its blossoms are edible. It loves to grow on highly disturbed, wind-blown soil. Oxima. It's very high in vitamin A. It's also a member of the dock family. Good eating. Equisetum glauca, and it will grow in highly disturbed, very sterile soil. It's very common everywhere. It's interspersed with... If this bladdercampion looks very familiar, it sure is. It's all over New England. But this is a much shorter version with extremely hairy leaves and stems. These very hairy leaves and stems make this plant extremely wind and dehydration resistant. That's why you see it as it is. These bergs right off the island I'm camping on supply organic material and fertilizer from the rock flour in the ice. Now begins a good story. Here's my kayak on the ramp. And at 4:30 in the morning, this is what it looked like. Well, later on, things changed. They sure did. It got foggy. But I decided to pack up and go out for a paddle despite all this dense fog. As I got partway across to this point, I decided that's not a good idea. I'm turning around. So I turned around and came back to the island. It cleared up a little bit, and I paddled on the north side of the island over to the adjacent islands where I looked in the water. I wanted to see our dense mussel beds where we come so often every year to dig these mussels and enjoy eating them. I chose to look over the side of my kayak because that's the only way I can really see how rich this area is. I continued paddling and noticed these lichens, which was very exciting to see. Lichens here are huge. Now, I was going through this incredibly shallow passage, which is something you can just walk across at low tide. I wanted to see, as I was coming around the corner, a iceberg that I could see, just out of curiosity to find out how large it was. In the Arctic, with this low angle of sun, things are highly magnified. Perspective is totally different. After numerous bright, sunny, perfect summer days, the usual windstorms came across Baffin Bay, and this is it.
Some questionable weather is starting to come in.
Every time I've paddled in this area of Greenland, I have seen exactly this happen, and it always was a nasty windstorm coming across Baffin Bay.
Fog is blowing back and forth.
This iceberg is bobbing back and forth, up and down, because it's starting to break up. The various parts of the bottom are starting to float away from the iceberg, making it unstable. That's why it's bobbing. The weather is starting to show signs of deterioration. Clouds are starting to hover at low altitudes on this island you see across the way. This is the view out of my tent after I had spent the entire night holding on to the tent to keep it from blowing away. These are the clouds that are wind-blown clouds that have come over from Baffin Island. The very powerful but typical of the area windstorm. This is the details of the cloud as I am looking over the backside of my tent. First, I resorted to trying to ballast the overhead guy ropes with food bags to try to help with holding the tent down. Looking out from my tent, I started to think about what was happening to my boat on the ramp, as I could see another storm was coming in. Even though I had gotten away with my tent ballasting trick of just using food bags, I knew I had to get that kayak up in front of the tent to position it in front of the tent to reduce the windage exposure. I was extremely lucky on this island, Simiataq, that I was downwind of really solid boulders, which I secured not just the tent but the kayak to as well. The last thing I wanted to have happen was to have the tent and or the kayak get blown over into that icy water. This time I knew without any doubt that I would have to use my new kayak rollers that I had devised, made out of slippery nylon with mylar twine bags inside partially inflated. My nylon surfaced rollers were also slippery, and I wanted to take advantage of that so that I could nest them between sharp, jagged cutting rocks and slide my kayak over those smooth surfaces. The orange foam pool noodle you see in this picture would never work because it would break apart on the sharp rock surfaces. I only used that pool noodle once on the very flat surface of the ramp, and I used it to fill out my cockpit. I survived the windstorm, another 2 days of ghastly wind blowing madly about, and then I stayed in my tent only to discover that some large icebergs had changed direction and blown right across, and they were moored right close to the island. The next thing I knew, they were about to break up at 4 o'clock in the morning. If conditions were just right and the iceberg large enough, it could create a wave that could wash me right off of the rocks where I was so comfortably camping. I was tired of all this threatening business with these icebergs and windstorms. It was time to turn around and head back west and have a last view of the beautiful rocks and take some special pictures of the minerals before I left for Upernavik. Aside from the beautiful flowers here, the rocks are really exquisite in color. Now I was heading west out of Simiataq Passage toward familiar territory on Lange. Dogs reside on this island, Long Island, during the summer. What's interesting to me as a kayak paddler is to watch the waves crisscross right in front of my bow. That was because of colliding currents. And to look at the path with shoreline that the dogs live on, all rounded granite seabed, metamorphosed. Now I am back in Upernavik. This is what it looks like in the harbor and the area around Gail. It's a wonderful place to set a boat out for launching because you can very easily set up your boat on these flat rock ramps and push off, and there you are on your way. I have been paddling from these rocks in Upernavik since 1992. Just specifically because of these natural rock ramps that occur here in Upernavik and the great geological stability we have in Upernavik. Thanks for watching my video. This is Gail Ferris, your narrator, videographer, and solo explorer. This was, to date, my last solo trip in the Upernavik area. That was 2011. Thank you.